There's a difference. You get a haircut, mine just falls out.
That's pretty funny. I like that. Well, should we get started?
Why not?
Well, Mike, I kind of gave you a heads up on what this topic was going to be about. Someone asked me this question, and I thought it was really interesting. They asked how I handle disputes in a closing. And specifically they asked not my style or any of those. They said, "Do you just refer these disputes to litigators or do you try and handle it in-house? And if so, what do you do and how do you resolve it?" And I thought I didn't really even make a point of it initially. But what I realized was that that was a valuable consideration when deciding who to hire as a closing agent. And so that's what this video is going to be about. And really, it's going to be a broader discussion about how do you evaluate a closing agent? How do you evaluate a partner? I don't know if I've ever told you this, Mike. My old boss, Mike Campbell, up in Atlanta, Georgia, he had all these little sayings. He's a Marine, awesome guy. And one of the sayings it's easy to remember was marry up, partner up, show up. Marry up, partner up, show up. So if we take that as our overarching theme, I want you guys to think about your closing agent or any partner that you have in that realm. You want someone that makes you better. You want a spouse that makes you better. You want a partner that makes you better. And then you got to show up and do the work. You ever heard something like that? Do you have any sayings that are similar to that, Mike?
It makes a lot of sense. To me, an attorney who can save a deal is invaluable.
Yeah, and I think you could say the same about a lender.
Yep.
So you could say the same thing about an inspector, or a lot of times people say the opposite about inspectors. People, they assume that this inspector is trying to kill the deal, or they're just being disruptive. And that's a terrible stigma to be placed with. And as an attorney, I fear that as well. I don't want to be the person that's being accused of throwing the deal. In fact, we had a closing that was in dispute. And I think the buyer wanted to terminate or something happened. And the listing agent sent an email saying, well, it sounds like the attorney wants to terminate. And I was floored because that is the opposite of the mindset I have. I want to find I want to find a way to get closed because we none of us get what we want out of that. The seller doesn't get their money, the buyer doesn't get the property, the realtors don't get paid, the attorney doesn't get paid. No one gets paid. So I'm always focused on what does everyone want to do? Does the buyer want to close? Does the seller want to close? And if so, then how do I get them there? And and one thing I've said before is as soon as you stop wanting to close, you need to let me know because everything I do is going to be towards closing. And we'll look at some examples in that regard. Um, but I wrote an article about it, and I haven't showed it with anyone yet. It'll go out this weekend, and this video will be attached to it. So let's see if I can show you guys this one.
On that inspector item, Christian, I would argue that an inspector might have saved you from future litigation. So I,
Yeah, let's talk about that. So there's two sides of it. I have inspectors that people really, really like that make a buyer feel good about what they're buying. I think it's a very important thing. Number one, I think it's important to get an inspection. Even if the seller has told you, hey, I agreed to this price because I don't want to have to repair or give you any credits, where this is at truly as is. I still want my buyer to get an inspection because you don't know what you don't know. I'd rather you walk away from a $10,000 deposit than buy a $500,000 house that you didn't even realize the problems you were walking into. But the opposite could be true too. If you have an inspector that just throws a bunch of dust in the air, that's not good either. Someone that's only pointing out and freaking the buyer out, that doesn't work. So there's a balance. There's definitely a balance. When was the last time you worked with an inspector, Mike? Probably been a while.
well, yeah, I've lived in my house for over 29 years, so
Well, I guess you helped your daughter buy a house. Was that a good experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, 100% of the time, I advise agents to always recommend getting all inspections.
Yeah.
Always.
I had that conversation with the buyer this morning, and I said, I usually just check all the boxes. I want the standard, I want the mold, the radon, the wind mitigation. Just give me the whole thing because you don't know what you don't know. And even beyond that, I think you should get a survey. I think that you should, luckily my office will always do a lien search and we'll do a title search. So we'll do that part of it for you. And if there's something else, I think the other thing in that regard is if the house is being listed as a brand new kitchen remodel or something, you want to see that not only was the permit closed, but they actually have a permit. That's a huge part of it as well. And and then another part of that is if you find a permit, you don't want to scare your buyer if it's kind of a non-issue. Not all permits are created equal. So if you have a major kitchen remodel and they never permitted it, I think that's a problem. But if you did you put a fence or you added a porch to the back and the permit didn't get closed, it may not be the biggest issue because that's something you could easily just determine was it done correctly or not. All right, so let me show you this article that I wrote, and you'll see this weekend. So why hiring a litigation-heavy law firm might not be in your best interest. Now, again, starting with the condition that everyone wants to close. The buyer wants to close, the seller wants to close. If you don't want to close, you probably do want to talk to a litigator, and that's my cue to start talking in that way. But until we get to that point, my clients, they want to close, and that's what I want to help them with. So number one, a hammer always finds a nail. And I think this is such a great phrase, and it makes so much sense for this. I've actually heard it on the medical field first, where surgeons like to perform surgery. That's their solution. Well, for litigators, they like to litigate. That's their solution. They don't have other tools that they can use in their box. So litigation firms are built to litigate. Their attorneys are trained and incentivized to gear up for battle, not to seek compromise. That mindset can quickly escalate a situation that might otherwise have been resolved through a phone call or a firm but respectful letter. At my firm, we approach legal problems getting to a smart resolution. And so, and someone could say this opposite. I'll say it. I'll take the wind out of someone else's sails before they do, or out of my sail. I'm not a litigator, so that's not a tool that I have in my toolbox. The only tool I have is actually finding that closing, getting to the closing, and using those tools. So I guess what could be a bad thing for a litigator could be a good thing for me, and vice versa. Hey, Dad,
Hey Chris, how you doing?
fashionably late again. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, you're gonna have to beat me. I read this yesterday. I thought of you and your brother,
All
honestly.
right, talk to me. My brother's a litigator.
You know, and he's the typical litigator. And I think it's something you're just born with. You like to fight, you like to win. You're not really in it to make everybody happy. And watching you two grow up. It's no big shock to me that your brother ended up being a litigator,
No.
and you do what you do. Um, I think there is some virtue in having some litigation experience so that when you're interpreting the contract, there might be language in the contract and the litigator in me will look at it and say, yeah, but that's going to cost $40,000 to enforce and it just isn't worth it.
Yeah.
Plus, you've seen the psychological toll it takes on the parties when they go through a lawsuit.
Yeah, if you've never been through a lawsuit, even as a lawyer, it could be very problematic. Let's look at some of the other items on here. The cost of war is always higher. You mentioned the cost. So litigation is expensive in both time and money. I'll give a quick math on this. If you want to hire a litigator, first they do a conflict check, and that takes a couple of days. They
Right.
want to make sure that they don't have a conflict with some other party that they would otherwise be suing. And then two, they have to actually spend time to get up to speed. They're not going to really give you advice or do a consult without putting some time into it. And they're going to charge you for that. a lot of litigators here in town, they're probably going to be 1,500 to 2,500 just to have that first consult because they got to spend a couple hours reviewing everything and then they're actually going to meet with you. And then I always predict maybe it's 2,500 to get up to that speed and send a threatening letter. But if you actually have to file a lawsuit, you're probably 10 grand deep at that point, and then it's 5 grand a month after that for however long it takes. It's a very broad estimate, but that's what I'm seeing more and more in the market. You're about 10 grand to get it started and 5 grand a month after that. It's expensive. So if we're talking about a $50,000 dispute, sounds like you should be able to sue for that, and you probably should or could. May not be worth it because 50 grand is less than 6 months.
Two points on that, Christian, and I have to fight people on this, and I can give you specific examples where this works. People tend to go towards the free legal advice. Oh, I have a friend who's a litigator, and they'll do it for nothing.
Such a disaster.
And with those cases, and the person who built out the office you're in, for example, was going through a lawsuit, and he was going through a divorce, and his spouse got a freebie from somebody. I recommended a particular person who was expensive. Our guy won. It's cheaper to pay a lot of money up front, get the best darn lawyer in town. They'll end it quicker, so there's less financial costs. Plus, there's less time loss. Plus, there's less psychological stress if you've never been through a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And that's
Let's keep looking at it. You're absolutely right. So litigation rarely ends cleanly. Even when you win a lawsuit, it can come at a great financial, emotional cost. And again, I'm getting a little deeper into what litigation is really like, and away from kind of the main theme, which is why it's not actually a benefit. So we'll keep going. This is, I think, the more important one. Your lawyer should be a deal maker, not a deal breaker. So
Right.
when you don't have the go-to litigation as a way to make money, then you're going to go to your other scenario, which is finding solutions to close as your way of making money. So for me, I am solely motivated to get you closed because that's how I earn a living. I,
Right.
handle your closing. I don't make a penny referring the litigation to you and telling you, oh yeah, you should do this. Whereas an attorney who has that conflict they can make money both ways. They can make money by referring you to their own litigator, or they can make money by closing you. To them, they don't really care. So
Yeah.
that's a little tricky. And then prevention is cheaper than the cure. And this is what I really want to hammer down on, which is how do you avoid this even to begin with? How do you make decisions, act in good faith so that you can avoid these types of conflicts? I think that's our biggest challenge is basically guiding our customers to avoid this in the first place.
I tell them clear communication, go above and beyond to over disclose, create an atmosphere of goodwill, anticipate their fears, address their fears, whether they're founded or not. And not only with the other party, but with the other realtor, because you're going to get realtors with different levels of experience. And sometimes there's a little bit of resentment that you're doing the work for both sides. But, we've all been there. We've all started at ground zero, knowing nothing. And if we can help out the other person, you maintain a good working relationship with the other side, and your deal gets closed and you get paid.
Yeah, yeah. It's fun. Mike, I'm curious what your thinking is. You and I, we see it, and Dad, we see it all the time where things start out on the right page and then they quickly go sideways. Mike, do you have any examples or like thoughts on that where like why is it that we start out on a price and then all of a sudden one thing happens and the other party feels slighted or taken advantage of?
Yeah, I think your dad nailed it. You've got to keep the lines of
All right, I'm
communication.
gonna cancel that. How do I remove that part?
I, I,
I've done it before, Christian.
as Don said, you have to keep the lines of communication open because one or the other or both make it personal and they got to win at all costs, then it's a lot more problematic to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And like you said, Christian, earlier, the cost of litigation. You gave an example of $5,000 a month. It can get a lot higher than that at times. I remember one that was six figures, and initially it looked like it was going to be a $10,000, $15,000 legal bill. So I mean, these things have a life of their own, and there's always surprises. I mean, Don and I used to do a lot of arbitration cases up at the board. There's always things that you weren't aware of. So you really have to think long and hard before you decide to go to the mat down the litigation road.
And it's not just communication, it's how you communicate. I'm a big fan of phone calls because you can schmooze better, you learn more better. The other side might say something that they don't think is particularly relevant, but helps you guide your customer on how to address future aspects of the closing. And it comes off as less abrupt. You get a text or an email, sometimes it comes across as cold versus if you call and say, "Hey, Mike, how the hell are you doing? And how's Ruth doing?" And blah, blah, blah. Then the bad news doesn't come across as so bad. You end up liking the other person, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. And I think we have to evaluate not just litigation, but just partnerships in general and what you need out of a partner. You want that partner to be great at what they do, and you want them to be a problem solver. An agent and friend of mine, Scott Bertha, was here earlier today, and we were talking about, if you hire someone and they end up making it harder on this whole deal, then that was a mistake. We hired the wrong person. And you only get so many shots at that. You have to hire the right people to, in a sense, it's part of your business. So when you talk about who you like working with, no matter what service it is, I think you need to promote that more. You have to say, look, here's why we like working with this inspector. Here's why we like working with this title company or law firm or lender. And because I'm seeing a lot of times with lenders where people are bringing their lender from back home into the market and they're saying, all right, I've done a million deals with this guy out of Boston and he's going to close our loan here.
Mm.
I think that the realtor has to stand up and say, that is your right. You have every right to do that. However, here's why I really want you to get a quote or at least talk to this person. They are a problem solver and they've saved this deal and that deal and the other deal. Because ultimately, if the deal goes sideways, then the realtor doesn't get paid and the buyer isn't happy, they don't close. So we want people that are problem solvers. And if you're a known problem solver, especially in this market, you've got to use it. You got to speak to the heavens about all that stuff. Amy says, I nailed it. All right, I like that. We'll make sure that you have to hire someone that makes things easier.
It's the most successful realtors I know have a team. They have their insurance person, their lender, their title company, their inspector, their repair person, and so on and so forth. So when they're dealing with somebody out of state, quite frequently, and my father went through this. I mean, he did this for 50 years. They would rely on him on who do you recommend for this or that or whatever.
Yep.
And you have your team. They know what you want. You know how they're going to perform. It is less glitches along the way. There's less
Yeah.
surprises
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking of something you brought up earlier that I thought was absolutely spot on, and that is the emotional toll of litigation. Because honestly, if you're involved in a lawsuit, you're thinking about it at nighttime. You go out to dinner with your wife. It kind of creeps into the conversation. And
Mm.
litigation is not a 2 week thing. I mean, this is something that takes months and sometimes years. So are you prepared for that?
Yeah, and I think that over long-term litigation, even something just a couple of months, your relationship with that attorney can sour very quickly because there are 1,000 moments in litigation, or if it was a closing, where I have to make a decision. and you may or may not agree with it, or maybe it was the wrong decision, or it was bad advice, and all of a sudden the relationship between me and my customer has soured. And that's really, really the challenge with litigation, is managing those emotions and those expectations that you're hiring someone who you believe is the best fit. I hope they are, but you're riding with them. When they make a mistake, you kind of pay the price, and when they make a great move, then you benefit from that. But it's I would say it's similar to running a business.
I
You're
would,
taking the
please
good
don't
with the
tell your
bad.
mother I said this, Christian, but I use, when somebody asks about this, I use your mother as an example. You remember we had the problem with
Don't
the
worry,
Marriott.
we don't post these on YouTube. It's okay.
Okay, well, yeah, we had a problem with the Marriott where they were putting in generators next to the house years ago. And I filed a noise complaint with the Colleague County Commissioners. And, and at that point, I was doing primarily litigation. And every single night I came home, your mother I'd be sitting there eating my dinner, and she'd be talking about the complaint with the Colleague County Commissioners and how we're going to lose, and the Marriott is big. And, there were nights where it's like, honey, can I just eat my meal in peace, and, don't worry, this is what I do, and I would go into the other room. And that always stuck in my mind as, for somebody who's never been through this before, you and I do it, Mike's had years of experience with it. We can put it in a little box and put it away when we go home. But for a new person, it's constant. It's absolutely constant.
So, Mike, what advice do you have? You deal with the threat of litigation. You deal with partners. You deal with different closing attorneys all through town. What is your mindset on how you kind of set yourself up for success in this industry?
Well, my mindset is always, how can we solve this without getting the lawyers involved?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And and that's step one. And sometimes you need to turn to attorneys to get legal advice. And part of it is, do I have a good case?
Right.
You might think you have a great case, but the lawyer will point out, wait a minute, there's some holes here. So getting advice to me is a smart move, but you really have to know what you're getting into. As Don said with his wife, your mom, it can consume you. I mean, really, you need to know what you're getting into. And frankly, in all my years of doing this, most problems can be solved. You
Yeah.
just got to keep the communication open. You've got to not just talk, but you've got to listen to what the other side is saying, digest it. Maybe they have a good point, and maybe there's some middle ground there where you both kind of win. But it's
Or you both kind
communication.
of lose, right? That's what a compromise ultimately is. I think that the big picture here is, I think we have to see the big picture. That's the big picture.
Yes.
You have to see the big picture. You have to act on the big picture, and you always have to remember to go back to your customer and say, "Do you still want to close?" Because that really does change how I help you. I have a couple of scenarios that I want to give you. So number one is, we had a conversation yesterday where we had a closing yesterday where the buyer just didn't close. And they're terrible at communicating. The only thing we know is that they were trying to sell a home up in New York so that they could close on the property down here in Florida. That's the only thing we know. And so I got on the phone with the seller and the listing agent, and the seller was really frustrated, and he was pretty brutal. And he just said, "Why aren't we closing?" And I said, "We don't know. We believe it's because the home up north hasn't closed, but otherwise we don't really know." He goes, "Well, I need to know. I need to know. I need to know." And I said, frankly, you don't need to know. It doesn't matter why the buyer didn't close. What matters is, do you want to close? Do you still want to close, or do you want to fight for a deposit, or do you want to find some sort of middle ground that works for everybody? And he didn't understand that. But my point was, we have a security deposit and we have a closing. Which one do you want? Do you want the closing, or do you want the security deposit? Do you want, because I can help you as long as you tell me that information. A litigator in that same scenario would tell you, all right, well, let's file a lawsuit. Starting tomorrow, 8 a.m., we'll file down in small claims court, or we'll file in superior court, or something like that. And I think that was really interesting. Now, the seller in that scenario, he wasn't hearing me. And we just we were on different pages, but my overarching point with him was it doesn't matter why the buyer hasn't closed. We just know that he's asking for an extension and we have a deposit. So can we use that information to get what you want? Do you want to close, or do you think you can sell it for more to somebody else?
I would do the same thing that you do, Christian, and I would add to it, which I just learned. People are emotional when you're giving them your advice, and I totally agree with it. I would tell them, well, why don't we sleep on it and then we'll talk in the morning? Because it's
Yeah.
hard for people to make a decision when they're wound up. And it's amazing how often in the morning they tend to drift a little more towards the middle ground. You strip the emotion out of it and they start looking at it like an accountant. It's numbers and what's best for you. Whether it's fair or not is really not relevant.
No.
Not in our business. Fairness is just take that out of the equation, and just sleep on it, and we'll talk in the morning, and they're calmer, more able to analyze it and reach a real decision, something that they honestly want.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting.
A
But
lot of
I think
psychology.
opportunity all along the way to guide our clients and prepare them. I'll compliment my wife. She's doing a wonderful job with our kids they're at camp. So
Right,
she's been talking to them all year. And Dad, you did this to me growing up, but she was talking to them all year about how great camp is going to be.
right,
And we're going to be able to do this, and it's going to be so fun for that. She was setting in their mind what to expect so that
right,
when camp came, they were ready and they knew they were supposed to be excited. And assuming everything was going to be fine, they were ready to be excited about it. And now that they're at camp and the end is coming, she's setting them up for what that's going to look like. So every day she's kind of dropping in little tidbits of camp's almost over. Let's enjoy every day. We have another day at camp. We're not done yet. And then, by the time we get to the end of the camp, she's be excited to be done and be like, oh my gosh, I get to go home and play with my Legos. Dad, you did that to me about college, and you probably didn't know you were doing it. But every year we would talk about, oh, I had the greatest time in college. Oh, it was so much fun, and I did this, and I went to concerts, and I got to go to these great lectures, or
right, right.
whoever said that. Maybe it was really just about the fun stuff. But and all the and so I went to college, and you always kid on me for this, but that first night in college, I was just lit up like a Christmas tree. I was
Oh,
so
really?
excited.
Well, that's
And I was
good.
just like going and knocking on random people's doors and doing this, and I was just ready for it. So ready. So I think the what I like doing is setting my customers up in the same way, telling them that, this is normal. This aren't you excited? You're almost sold. You've almost closed. What are you going to do when you close? And kind of setting the stage so that when something does go awry, they saw it coming and like, oh, yep, this is what you told me. You warned me that the inspection would be a little worse than what the guy told you in person.
So do
That's
I get
all.
credit for you knocking on all the girls' doors in your entire building after you moved in, introducing
Just
yourself and
being
your friend?
friendly. I was just being friendly. Yeah.
I
But I,
thought
I think
I
it's
got
really
you.
cool. So we have a close friend that's buying a house, and the inspection went really well. In person, the inspector said, "Hey, this is fantastic. I can't even find anything. Everything is so wonderful." And so I said, "Oh, that's awesome. Just be aware that a lot of times they put stuff on that report, even though they told you everything was
Yeah.
fine. So don't be surprised if there are a bunch of things on there that he said wasn't an issue." And so then when we got it, and there were one or two things,
They were
she was ready
prepared.
for it. She was prepared for it, and that it didn't freak her out. And I think if we can do that, and you can talk to people correctly, and we communicate in that way, you're really going to set them up for success. So set up your customers for success, and you'll reap the benefits. So
Prepare their
I'll finish.
expectations.
I'll finish with I started, Dad, you missed it. I started the conversation by giving a Mike Campbell quote, which was marry up, partner up, show up, right? That is everyone's goal when thinking about your life. And I'm going to finish with another Mike Campbell quote that, of course, I just forgot. I'm gonna
Does
have
he
to
know
put it.
you're quoting him all the time, by the way?
What'd you say?
Does he know you quote him all the time?
I hope so. He's got some good stuff. But basically I don't know how, gosh, now I'm distracted. I don't even remember what
It's
the
tough when
second
you hit
quote.
40, Christian. You start to lose things.
I'm not there yet. Almost. Almost. So marry up, partner up, show up. That's the good one. I'll have to think of the other quote and I'll put it in the email. So keep a lookout for my email for this weekend. I'll put a link in the video for this video. So again, if you missed any of these videos, go on youtube.com. We always have them. But I'm excited to continue to serve you guys and do everything we can to help. So enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your week, your summer, what we have, and good luck. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris.